So once again, you are welcome to our lecture series in the subject Human Rights Education. And in this lecture, we will be discussing the rights under Republic Act 9262, or otherwise known as the VAWC law, or the Violence Against Women and Their Children law. However, we are going also to discuss other matters concerning the protection of rights of women and children. So some of the reminders for us, for parents, if you are already a parent, it says here in Proverbs 22 verse 6, train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it. And for the husbands, kayong mga may asawa dyan, na mga lalaki, for husbands, this means love your wives just as Christ loved the church. He gave up his life for her. Okay, so again, your lecturer today is Sir D, Tatay D, or Dr. D. So at the end of this lesson, the viewers are expected to understand the concept of the VAWC and to determine the rights of the women and children under Republic Act number 9262, as well as to understand the historical development of rights of women and children in the Philippine setting. To understand the rights of women, if we go back in the pre-colonial Philippines, women during those time were offered the greatest opportunities in relation to their social positions. They were allowed to hold high positions in their communities as healers and even as priestesses. Okay? So napakataas ang katungkulan na pinagkakaloob sa mga babae nung bago pa man dumating ang mga Kastila. So when you say pre-colonial, this was the time in the Philippine history where the Filipinos or the islanders were not yet under the um, regime or under the colonization of the Spanish, the American, and the Japanese. Again, during the pre-colonial, prior to the arrival of the Spanish, it was already common for women to take leadership roles in the barangays and to fight as warriors. Okay, so hindi lang mga lalaki, nung unang panahon, hindi lang able-bodied men, even women before were already considered to fight as warriors. And during those times, one of the first things that a man should learn was that he had to respect women. And when a man is caught or found to be respecting women, okay, it was very unthinkable actually because they have a high regard of women. And if a man was caught disrespecting women during the time, he was labeled negatively by the rest of society. In other words, siya ay ina-outcast sa society kasi hindi siya nagrerespeto ng mga babae. And even the heads of the barangays during the time were often men. However, women at that time were already given the right to become as equal by their husband and to share his honors. Okay? Kaya kaya sa mga Filipino, say for example, pagsasabihin nila sa mga born again Christian church, sabihin nila kay pastor, pastor, ang tawag nila sa asawa, pastora, maganon, di ba? Okay, kapag si kapitan, yung asawa niya, kapitana, ganon. Okay, kaya yung tatay mo, karpintero, ang tawag nila kay nanay ay karpintera. Kaya pag ang tatay mo, pintor, nanay mo ay pintura. Okay, so, ganun yun. But kidding aside, okay, kung ano yung mga honor na binibigay sa mga lalaki noon, ay ganun din ang binibigay sa babae. Kaya si Hari automatically nagiging reyna si babae. Okay, so again, the women during those times were accordingly were allowed to retain their maiden name, meaning di nila kailangan isunod yung apelyido nila sa mga asawa nila. But I don't agree much with this because during the pre-colonial time, wala pa namang mga apelyido noon. Okay? So they were freely disposed of the property she had brought into her marriage, meaning kung ano yung property niya na dala-dala niya nung siya ay nakipag-asawa, kay a woman was given the freedom to dispose or ibenta yung kanyang property. Okay, hindi tinatawag na conjugal property, something like that. What else? The women before were we call it consulted, okay, or informed by her husband about his business affairs and contracts. So, pag si lalaki noon, pag may mga businesses siya or whatever na endeavors niya, kailangan ko consult niya sa asawa niya. And a woman before, okay, has the right to divorce her husband in case of non-support or maltreatment. So accordingly, no, pwede nang ang babae ang mag-file ng divorce pag di nagsusuporta yung lalaki. And the woman was to assume the headship of the barangay in case na tawag natin walang able-bodied man. So the woman may be allowed to head the barangay. And the woman also during the time, or the women the time also, they have the right whether to have a baby or not, whether she is married or not. Na? So gusto ko mag-asawa, hindi, walang magawa yung lalaki. And si babae noon ay nabigyan din, ang mga babae noon ay nabigyan din noon ng karapatan na sila magbigay ng pangalan sa kanilang mga anak. So, yung makikita natin na during the pre-colonial time, no, bago pa man dumating mga Kastila, ay napakataas ng dignidad ng mga babae sa ating mga komunidad in the Philippine settings, according to the history. So here comes the Spanish. Here comes the Spanish. Okay. So during the time, well, alam natin na dala-dala nila yung kultura sa Spain. Okay, ano ba ang kultura sa Spain noon? Hari, rina, okay, tapos may mga peasants or yung mga magsasaka, no? Then you have the landlords, okay? So feudalism ang type of government na dala-dala nila sa Pilipinas. So because of that, women during that time, Filipino women during that time were unable to execute their rights and were restricted by certain norms and expectations in society. Because ang gusto ng mga Spanish, kung ano yung kultura nila na lowly regarded ang mga babae sa kanilang bansa, sa Europa, ganun din ang mangyayari sa Pilipinas. Okay? So dahan-dahan nawawala yung mataas na dignidad ng babae sa komunidad because of the social norms that were brought by the Spanish colonizers. So they were not allowed, the women were not allowed to share their ideas nor participate in the decision-making process. So, naging inferior si babae, naging mas mababa na siya. And they were asked to till the land with their husbands as peasants for pittance. In other words, yung mga Roman Catholics noon, mga Spanish noon, ay silang nag-develop ng mga lupain, kinuha nila mga Indios, yung mga native Filipinos, para magsasaka nila kasama ang mga babae na magsasaka. What else? The Filipino women during the time were inferior to men and were discriminated against not only by men but by the very institutions they belong to in society. So, kapag sila ay membro ng kanilang church, ng kanilang komunidad, ng kanilang family, nag-start ngayon yung discrimination of women. Naging inferior na sila, no, sa tingin ng mga lalaki, no, hindi na lamang yung mga Espanyol kasi nga tawag natin nahawa na rin yung mga Filipino families after 100 years or after how many years that they were administered and colonized by the Spanish. Dahan-dahan na immune ngayon yung buhay ng mga lalaki or uh, Filipino families dun sa way of culture ng mga Spanish. Kaya nga meron tayong sabong, may mga sugal tayo, no, may mga karera tayo, no, galing 'yan sa tawag natin sa Spanish culture. Arguably, it was seen as slaves, meaning ang mga babae noon ay parang mga alipin at mas mababa pa ang tingin nila sa mga lalaki. Kung ang mga lalaki ay mababa ang tingin ng mga Spanish, mas mababa pa ang tingin nila sa mga babaeng Filipina during that time. Kaya pag kinuha nila mga katulong sa mga kumbento, katulong sa mga bahay ng mga yaman Espanyol, ay parang alipin ang kanilang ang turing sa kanila. And some of them were violated by parish priests as many young women were often raped or sexually abused in beaterios, meaning to yung mga bahay ng mga seminarians, kay bahay ng mga religious relics no, during the time. That's why yung mga problems na ganyan, mga violation of women, they were already mentioned and emphasized by our national hero, Dr. Serizal, sa kanyang book na El Filibusterismo at saka yung Noli Me Tangere. Okay, so ganon ang naging buhay. So from the mataas na dignidad ng babae, dahan-dahan ay nawala yung equality of women sa ating society during the Spanish time. Now, when the Americans came in the late 1800s or early 1900s at the transition of 18 to 1900s, okay, on the early part of the American regime, well, in the history ay hindi pa totally na nasakop ng Amerika ang Pilipinas. Years after 1901 or 1900, marami pa ring mga insurgencies or kumokontra laban sa mga Americans because they thought that time that the Americans were the same as the Spanish. Kaya maraming lumalaban, okay, marami ang kumukontra sa kanila. And because of that, because of the high incidence of insurgency, okay, lahat ng mga Filipino halos ay hindi pinagkakatiwalaan ng mga Americans. That's why they rape, they killed, and torture children and women para makakuha sila ng mga information about sa whereabouts ng mga insurgents, ng mga rebelde laban sa kanila, no? Yan, yun ang kanilang ginawa. And accordingly, even as young as the age of 10, as long as the child is already capable of wielding an arm, they were killed, no? Kasi sila yung mga threats sa mga Americans. And one of the most infamous incident during the American regime was of course yung Balangiga massacre in Bataan. Down below, the picture down below kung saan sinusunog nila yung mga baryo, ni-rape, pinatay mga babae, no? So there were incidences according to the history na kahit buong baryo sinusunog ng mga Americans because para lang matapos nila yung insurgency so that they could administer the country. So of course, dahan-dahan nag-surrender yung mga Filipinos, eventually na-stop yung ganong uri ng treatment ng mga American sa lahat ng mga Filipino, including women and children. So on the latter part of the American regime, kung saan medyo na-stabilize na nila yung kanilang administration sa Pilipinas, okay, dahan-dahan din nabigyan din ng kunting rights at dignidad ang mga babae. However, women before, Filipino women before, were still discriminated in schools due to absence of gender equality. So pinayagan na silang pumunta sa school, however, they were discriminated kasi wala pang gender equality that time. So mas mababa pa rin yung tingin nila sa mga babae. And they were allowed to vote. They were given the right to vote that time, but they were not allowed to run for a government office. And they were discouraged to send their daughters to school. Sabi nila, wag niyo nang pag-aralin mga bata, mga anak ninyong mga babae. Anyway, mag-aasawa mga yan, pangbahay lang mga yan. So, na-relegate yung mga babae into house chores. And during that time, uh, yung mga American, yung mga Filipinos, they learn also the cultures of the Americans kasi na-appreciate na rin ng mga Amerikano. So, iba kasi sa Amerika, no? Sa Amerika kasi ay tawag natin uh, ang mga babae doon ay lesser din nung panahon ng mga yan, ano? So, at ang mga sa panahon na yan, ang mga lalaki noon sa Amerika, ang mga breadwinners, so ganun din ang nangyari sa Pilipinas. The Filipino women became more dependent on their husbands and they were forced to fit into rules of a daughter and a wife. Kailangan pangbahay na lang sila bilang anak na babae or bilang asawa. So that those were the things na nangyari sa American regime. So nabawasan ang mga abuses during the latter part. However, medyo hindi na na-regain ng mga Filipino women yung kanilang dignity before the colonization of the country. Now, here comes the Japanese. No? For 3 years, 1942 up to 1945, there were so many abuses, thousands of abuses against Filipino women and children. They were raped, they were forced to become comfort women, they were tortured, they were starved to death, they were detained, okay? Kinukulong daw sila from 1 day to 1 year, magiging comfort women, mga bata, no? Kinukuha na lang sa kalye, dadalhin sa mga kampo. Okay, so of course, kasagsagan ng giyera yan, kaya walang batas na tawag natin magtatanggol sa mga kababaihan at mga bata during the time. And of course, the story of comfort women kasi, ang Japanese kasi ang kultura rin nila ay ang tingin nila sa mga babae ay property. That's why mataas ang prostitution sa Japan. Kaya nga nung 1970s, 1980s, pag pumunta ka ng Japan, ang tawag sa'yo Japayuki. Pag sinabing Japayuki ka nun, ang tingin nila sa'yo ay prostitute ka sa Japan. Yun ang connotation noon. No? Kaya pag sinabing Japayuki yung babae noon, during that time, 70s and 80s, negative ang connotation nila na this one is working in a bar or parang mga prostitute doon sa Japan. Okay, so ganun kasi yung kultura ng mga Hapon prior to coming to the country, prior their coming to the country, well, ganun talagang tingin nila sa mga babae sa Japan as sex properties, sex slaves. So ganun din, wala silang regard sa mga babae during the time that they came to the country. Kaya thousands of Filipino women were raped, were tortured, yan, not only women, even children. Again, pati mga bata pinapatay din, ano? Mga lalaking bata lalong-lalo, mga panganak na lalaking bata kasi mga threat sila. Well, that is maraming mga crimes of aggression or mga war crimes during the Japanese occupation. So after the Japanese, no, mayroon ng nation building, dahan-dahan na tinatawag natin buuin uli ang ating bansa, the post-colonial period. And the violence against women that time was not as widespread, okay, or publicly compared, or public, matters di na nakikita, compared to the colonial years. After World War II, more and more women had become politicized. In the beginning, not too many women were present in mainstream politics, and eventually, mas marami na dumalo sa mga ideological groups in the 70s, in the 80s, na at marami na yung mga tumatawag natin, they were now given the right to vote and to run for politics. Okay? So, yun ang mga development sa mga Filipino women during the post-colonial period. And however, on the post-colonial period, dala-dala pa rin yung patriarchal contradictions or patriarchal. So there was a patriarchal contradictions and dichotomized icons of idealized femininity and degraded whoredom of feminine plentitude and feminine lack. So anong ibig sabihin yan? So somehow, yung mga Filipino no, na nag-survive from the American regime, so dala-dala pa rin nila yung kultura na ang lalaki ang boss, ang babae pambahay. Okay? Although nagkaroon na ng rights sa mga babae, so marami pa rin mga lalaki na wag dalhin sa school ang mga babae, no? I remember my mother is a very intelligent woman, but she was not uh, encouraged to study, no? Kasi nga babae daw, mag-asawa rin, ganun ang mga style noon. Kaya marami sa mga babae noon hindi na nag-aaral kasi nga dala-dala nila doon sa kultura ng mga American culture nung pumunta sa Amerika ang mga Pilipino dito sa ang mga Amerikano dito sa Pilipinas. Okay? So ganon, dala-dala yan hanggang the post-colonial period. So instead of setting right the wrongs, okay, let loose by the colonizing patriots, the national patriarchy continued the colonization of women by desecrating the female body and by degrading women to mere body. So, dala-dala yon na ang babae ay pambahay na lang, okay, pang sexual relationship na lang, okay, aanakan mo na lang yan. So, yun ang nangyari. Instead na correcting that, so parang nag-stagnant yung mentalidad ng mga Filipinos during the time. And there was a performative display of violence on the female body carried out by the country's power wielders contains, besides its pornographic imports, the ominous implication that it will be told and retold as immoral tale to threaten women into submission and subjugation. Ano yan? Noong 1960s, 1970s, no, andito pa rin ang mga American sa Pilipinas. And open na rin ang mga Hapon dito sa Pilipinas. So yung mga sa western countries ay uso ang mga pornography, mga Playboy magazine like that, no? So because of that, napasok sa Pilipinas yung mga ganong pornographic materials at ang subject of pornography those times were women. So na-desecrate ang babae during the time. Kaya marami noon ang mga nag-hostess, magpo-prostitute, okay? They were subject ng mga tawag natin sexual things. Kaya in Manila during those times, may mga live show na tinatawag nila, no? So, in even some other cities, nausong mga cabaret or mga dance floor na kung saan nandun mga babae, sinasayaw sila, no? So, yun ang nangyari do sa mga panahon na yan. Okay, so while it was not as rampant as in the previous years, no? Violence against women in the post-colonial hanggang ngayon it still happened during the post-colonial period as women in the Philippines were often sexually abused, harassed, and objectified by the rest of the society. Okay, so yun ang nangyari noon. Okay, so somehow kailangan makorek yung mga pangyayari na gano'n sa ating bansa. So with that, the 9262, the VAWC law, okay, eventually was promulgated in our country para somehow ay mabawasan or matanggal na yung violence against women and their children. So what is that violence against women and their children? These are the series of acts committed by any person, take note, any person against a woman who is his wife, okay? Former wife or against a woman with whom the person has or had sexual or dating relationship, meaning yung sino mang tao lalaki na nagkaroon ng relasyon or karelasyon or asawa niya ang biktima, okay, or with whom he has a common child. Okay, mayroon silang anak na illegitimate child, no? Kasi di sila kasal, or against her child, whether legitimate or illegitimate, within or without the family abode. Meaning nasa labas o wala sa kanilang tahanan yung batang yan. So the VAWC basically is a crime between a woman and the man na mayroon siyang karelasyon niya or former na karelasyon niya that may result to physical, sexual, psychological harm or suffering or economic abuse, including threats of such acts, battery, assault, coercion, harassment, or arbitrary deprivation of liberty. No? Yun yun. Binubulyawan, okay? Binubugbog, okay? Ginagawang sexual object lang yung asawa niya, mga anak niya, everything, okay? Hindi pinapakain, hindi sinusuportahan. All of those things will fall under the violence against women and their children. Okay, so including acts of battery, assault, coercion, harassment, okay, arbitrary vibration of liberty, okay, binubugaw yung kanyang mga anak, okay, binubugaw yung kanyang asawa, okay. So those are we call it covered na mga bagay na. Of course, there are other laws that may be covered that may cover those things. So, who are protected under the VAWC law? The law recognizes the unequal relations between a man and a woman in an abusive relationship, as mentioned in 1987 Constitution, where the woman is usually at a disadvantage. No? Kaya gusto ng ating bansa na tingnan natin yung equality para mabawasan at matanggal yung abusive relationship na kung saan laging talo ang babae. No? Talo ang babae niyan kasi pag naanakan ka na, no, wala na, halos wala nang bibihira na yung siseryosohin ka, no? Pag may experience ng babae, bihira nang siniseryoso yan ng mga lalaki. Okay lang si lalaki, pag may experience na yan, hindi matatanggal yung pagkalalaki niya. That's why you, ladies, no, be careful with your body, no? Kasi once na mayroon kang experience, ay iba na ang tingin sa inyo ng mga lalaki, no? Mas mababa na. Okay, so if you by force or by we call it consent or by ignorance, you have already an experience sexually, be sure na wag na maulit yan kasi bababang tingin ng mga lalaki yan. Normal yan sa kultura ng Pilipino. Okay, another one, the law also protects the woman and their children. And the victim child who is a minor, legitimate and legitimate, okay, ay sila ang protected ng VAWC. Even the 18 years old above, as long as yung 18 years old above na yan na anak ay kulang siya sa maturity ng kanyang mental faculties, okay, emotional faculties, can also be protected by this law because they are still considered as children, okay, because of their weak, immature emotional, physical, and mental faculties. So any child under the care of a woman is also protected under the law, yung VAWC na tinatawag natin. Okay? So anong pwedeng gawin ng mga bata at mga asawa, mga babae na they are victimized under RA 9262 or mga biktima ng mga violations ng RA 9262. Okay, they can apply for protection order so that okay, hindi na sila malapitan ng abusado sa kanila. Under the law, the offended party may file a criminal action or apply for protection order, either as an independent action or as an incident in civil or criminal action and other remedies. Meaning, pwedeng separate na action, criminal action, or maaring kasama ito sa mga ibang mga pangyayari sa loob ng bahay, pangyayari between the husband and the woman. Okay? So, ganon ang idea sa RA 9262. Well, again, the purpose of RA 9262 is somehow to bring back the lost dignity of the women, Filipino women, before the colonization of the country. So, yun ang isang pinaka-purpose niyan, ano? Na maibalik yung mataas na dignidad sa mga babae. So here is a scenario. Mark and Shena were living as a common law spouses, meaning they are living as husband and wife, but they are not married. Mark is known to be a habitual drunkard and often maltreat his common law wife whenever he was drunk. Shane filed a case in court against Mark for violating Republic Act number 9262. Ang sabi ni Mark, well, I should not be punishable by RA 9262 kasi di naman kami mag-asawa. Di naman kami kasal. Tama ba yung contention ni Mark? See, the contention of Mark is incorrect. Even if they were not married with each other, Mark is still liable under Republic Act number 9262 because his relationship with Sheena is considered intimate in the sense that they were already living as common law spouses. Under the contemplation of the law, the situation can be considered as dating relationship. Kaya covered siya doon. Covered doon yung kaso ni Mark and Sheena. So, of course, in the country, to upgrade the rights of women, hindi lamang yung 9262. In fact, we have also a lateral law, the Republic Act number 9710, the Magna Carta of Women. Okay, that is Magna Carta. You pronounce that Magna, but it's okay. That's Magna Carta or the Magna Carta of Women. Okay, what is that law? The law affirms the role of women in national building and ensures the substantive equality of women and men in society. So, ini-enforce nito or hina-highlight nito, ini-ensure nito na mayroong equality ang babae at lalaki sa society in matters of employment, in matters sa loob ng tahanan, everything. And it empowers women and for equal opportunities for both women and men. That's why in the uniform services, dumarami na ang mga female. No? In the government, marami na ang mga female. It highlights the state position, particularly of how the state condemns discrimination against women in all its form and pursues the equality of women. No? So yun ang titignan no, na kinukundina ng ating government, ng ating state, ang discrimination against women. So what else? What are the pertinent provisions of RA 9710? It consists the provisions on the principle of human rights of women, the definition of women's rights, the duties related to the human rights of women, the rights and empowerment of women, especially those affected by calamities or disasters in the marginalized sectors or in especially difficult situations, and the institutional mechanism through which rights of women are protected and upheld. Okay? Meaning, mayroong dapat mga institutional mechanism, meaning ano yung mga process para i-handle, para i-process kung mayroong mga alleged violation of the rights of women. And finally, the implementing rules and regulation concerning the Magna Carta for women. Okay? So, that is to strengthen further the 9262, no? Para somehow bumalik yung dignity ng mga Filipino women. Okay? Now, in connection with the VAWC law and as well as the protection of women and children, we have many laws in the country actually that uplifts women's right and protection of children. Okay, and these are some of the laws. I'm not going to discuss them. Just give you an idea what are these laws. So you have the Republic Act 7877, the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act of 1995, no? Yung yung pagbibigay ng limitation sa mga green jokes and everything, no? Marami yan. Basta anything about sexual advances. The Republic Act 8353, the Anti-Rape Law of 1997, kung saan ginawang crimes against person ang rape. Hindi na ito crimes against chastity na nakalagay sa revised penal code because sa crimes against chastity, kung hindi nag-complain yung rape victim, wala na. Absuelto yung kaso. So in the anti-rape law, at least the guardian or parent or other person may file a complaint in behalf of the rape victim. Then you have the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act of 2003, the RA 9208, kasi maraming mga dinadala sa ibang bansa o kaya dinadala sa probinsya, dinadala sa mga sentro, sa mga urban places, gawing mga prostitute, like that, no? The Rape Victim Assistance and Protection Act of 1998 or RA 8505, the Women in Development and Nation Building Act, okay, the RA 7192, then you have the Anti-Child Pornography Act of 2009, RA 9775. Of course, you have the RA 7610, the Special Protection of Children Against Child Abuse, Exploitation and Discrimination Act. You have the Republic Act 8369, the Family Courts Act of 1997, kung saan yan yung institutionalized mechanism para sa mga tinatawag nating family courts. Okay? Kapag may mga involving problems in the family, dyan pupunta yung mga kaso. Then you have the Republic Act 3815 or better known as the Revised Penal Code. Okay, nandyan yung mga batas, of course, penalizing and punishing and penalizing crimes against women and children. You have the abduction, the seduction, concubinage, the acts of lasciviousness, okay? And what else? You have the parricide also. You have the infanticide case under that. Then you have the RA 10354, the Responsible Parenthood and Reproductive Health Act of 2012, kung saan sinisigurado na hindi ka anak ng anak, no? Kundi tinutulungan ang mga magulang upang maging responsible parents sila. Okay? Sa pagbuo ng kanilang family, because one of the problems ng abuses sa ating bansa is of course dahil napakarami yung members ng family. Then you have RA 10361, the Domestic Workers Act or Batas Kasambahay. Okay, so dati kung ano na lang pinibigay na sweldo sa mga katulong sa bahay at karamihan naman ng katulong sa bahay, mga babae, so sila ang karamihan na exploit niyan. So somehow this law ay ina-flip yung dignity at saka yung employment status ng mga babae na nagiging mga katulong. And you have RA 8972, the Solo Parents Welfare Act. Okay, kapag mga solo parents ngayon, ay mayroon silang mga tulong nang gagaling sa ating mga gobyerno. O kaya yung mga iniwan ng mga boyfriend dyan na naanakan sa inyo, yan, pwede kayong humingi ng tulong sa government. Okay, based on the Solo Parents Welfare Act. Of course, we have more laws sa ating bansa na patuloy na natawag natin na uplifting the rights of women and as well as children. So to close our discussion in this subject, what about the Bible? Ano naman sinasabi niya tungkol sa mga asawang babae at sa mga children? Okay, sa mga children, sa mga bata. Okay, so in 1 Peter chapter 3 verse 7, likewise, husbands, live with your wives in understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. So, yun. Kaya minsan ay nasabi niya ay hindi nasasagot yung panalangin kasi baka ina-abuse yung asawa, no? Baka ina-abuse. And of course, in Ephesians chapter 6 verse 4, the Apostle Paul, sabi niya sa mga early Christians, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So, tamang disiplina ang ibigay sa mga bata and the discipline coming from the Lord. That's why dapat ang mga magulang ay hinahayaan yung mga bata na nag-attend ng mga church gatherings, okay? Para tawag natin sila ay matrain in the way of the Lord. Okay? So that's all for our subject matter for this video. Okay, hope you learn, and if you have some comment or question, you are free to write them down in the comment section. Once again, thank you for watching and listening. Good day and God bless you all.